Hello, everybody, and welcome to SecureChainCon 2025. I have the pleasure today to introduce our keynote speaker, Jon Willis, or as we lovingly call him, the professor on some of the TechStrong gang calls that we do together. Today, we are going to be covering AI-powered code parsing and semantic analysis for DevOps pipelines. I know many of you have been hearing me kind of hammer on about where is AI in DevOps. Well, we're going to talk about that today with the professor. Jon, thank you for being here. And why don't you just get started by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I guess professor with a lowercase p, if you don't mind, right? Yeah, no, been doing this an awfully long time, like yourself. I've gone through sort of like 4 decades of IT technology shifts, but probably more importantly is I'm well known for being one of the initial instigators for DevOps. I was the only American at first DevOps days. I helped bring the first DevOps days in the US. Co-wrote the DevOps Handbook with Gene, Kim, Jez Humble, and Patrick Boy, and it just really became part of the DevOps thing. I've always been an infrastructure and operations person, and then about 3 years ago, I got really interested in, really actually scared. I'll say this real quick. I always think of infrastructure and operations people as cicadas. We go to sleep for like a number of years, and then we wake up and like, what in the heck did you all do? And then we just literally have to start cleaning everything up, and we're in one of those cloud was clearly one of those moments. We're in one of those moments with AI, and I saw this, pretty early looking at it from like how are large corporations going to deal? They're going to do it. There's no stopping it. We've seen this with cloud. So therefore, how CIOs, what can I do to say to help a CIO try to see the future? And by the way, it's shadow IT all over again. So those kind of things I've been really focused. So 3 years ago, I really tried to understand what is AI? How can I be intelligent about it? And how can I talk to an executive about what I think you need to prepare for?
Yeah, boy, I think I try to be as visionary as possible as well in these areas because, we have to navigate that, in particular through our open source project, Ortelius. So let me tell you what the Ortelius team has been working on. We have sort of a sub-architecture group led by a brilliant technologist by the name of Utkar Sharma. Right around the time I started hearing about MCPs, or Model Context Protocols, um, I got pretty excited because I started understanding the possibility that maybe we have, instead of LLMs and these foundational models, that we have small models, right? We have SLMs that could be more specific to a particular domain. Um, and not, I didn't know about it, but that the Utkarsh and Steve Taylor had been talking about MCPs as well. So I brought it up to the team like it was a new idea, and they were like, "Yeah, yeah, we've been talking about it." So we started a little sub project, and they've done quite a bit of work around these model context protocols. And what we're looking at potentially doing, and I'm phrasing this so you could maybe give us a little bit of
Sure,
tips in this
for
area.
sure.
What we're going to do now, right now, is what we want to do is the project already can track a open source package to an endpoint running in a live environment.
Nice,
Think
nice.
about military applications, right? Satellites.
Yeah.
We don't have to, and we do it through the DevOps data because we grab the SBOM, we grab the metadata from the deployment log, we version it, and then and we know, okay, this is running in production. We constantly synchronize it against OSV dev. So what we're looking at doing to start, just a baby step, is to use MCPs to do something very simple. We're going to first just create an issue when a critical or high risk vulnerability shows up, and create an issue for every single project that's using that, which is a lot, right? But what we want to get to is we want to be able to grow that to a full-on pull request by going through the process of finding a mitigation. And it may just be for the Docker files and the POM files. Correct the pin, right? The pinning of the corrected version, and create a pull request. So we're starting to think about how we can auto remediate for critical and high risk vulnerabilities that are actually impacting production. I realize all the other stuff is still important. So, SCA, trying to find it before you get it to production, but it's never going to end the problem of new vulnerability showing up after we've done all the shift left work. So we're shifting right a bit and trying to fix the problem from there, and we're growing into an auto remediation, so the tool's acting like a self-healing immune system. So in that kind of discussion, tell us, think about what it looks like for at least these large language models like CodeBERT and changing kind of the DevOps game to do that kind of updating and automated self remediation.
I would start with the question, why do you need me? It sounds like you guys got it pretty well nutted right now in terms of, I mean, that just sounds fantastic, So, I mean, it so aligns with all my research and understanding of like how we're going to emerge these problems. I think there's one thing I want to say, then I want to step back a little bit. I think what's interesting about you'd mentioned sort of the excitement around small language models. I think what I'm finding is this hybridity between large language models for general information and then pinpoint the exact or the more locale information from smaller, it's basically expert models based on a topic, right? And then you throw a little bit of RAG in there, and now you got, and then you're spot on. The sort of agentic RAG or sort of the RAG architecture between I want to get general information. And again, as we all know, the reasoning models for the large language models are amazing. So you're sort of bouncing between, sort of frontier models and small language models that are very specific. You're collecting RAG information that gives you more context. So I think that's all good. I will, I know you're not an naysayer, but the step all the way back, I heard a presentation recently from LabCorp and and one of the sort of the chief AI officer, which I hate the idea that organizations are creating chief AI. Well, not so much that they're chief AI, the fact that they're separated from CIOs is that's no longer a discussion. But we gave a great presentation about how they built this remediation system for their 24-hour desk that answers calls from nurses and doctors on lab results. Right? It's highly technical, very sort of like high consequence enters, right? And so they went through the whole thing. They built the models. They did tons of work. And then they got challenged at sort of the first implementation about, oh, that's going to be dangerous. What if it gives out the wrong answers? Fortunately for this person, they had collected the last 3 or 4 years of all the transcripts. When they ran a parallel evaluations, sort of computational and qualitative and quantitative analysis of answers, ground truth, and all that good stuff. And they ran that against both, and the remediation, the AI generated remediation was like 10% better than the last 3 or 4 years. So I think we need to start there. That this assumption that humans are by default better, I don't think that's the truth. To dive a little deeper. Yeah, I think I think that whole thing about where, how we're going to be able to use it's awesome that you're excited about MCP, right? And it is this idea that we can now sort of glue things together with better intent. And what I mean by that was like I think RPA was a disaster. I know not everybody agrees with me. I mean, when I first saw it, I said this is going to be a train wreck. You're putting in systems that screen scrape a whole enterprise and make rule-based decisions. Now they said they used AI, but AI was like not in the reasoning models that we have now. And literally, and it did solve problems. Like it did, but it was just technical debt tsunami. And so what I think, I think the glass being half full of agentic protocols is that we're going to be significantly better with these reasoning models, particularly if we can use, like we said, large language models for general, small language models for specific, RAGs to help tell us more information about what has been happening in an environment and put all that together is going to be, I would say, if there's a benchmark eventually for this type of stuff, RPA would be in the 30s to 40% in these as these sort of agentic processes or these protocols it's going to be probably in the 70, 80s, maybe 90% from a
So let's
benchmark.
back up a minute, just because I know some of our viewers are DevOps people, and AI is not something that they're studying a lot.
Sure.
Let's talk about RAG. Can you explain this idea of this, retrieval
Yeah.
augmented generation and how it might apply to DevOps?
Yeah, no, it's a great. I'm glad you did ask that because sometimes I make a mistake assuming everybody knows the.
Okay.
I do that all the time. So RAG very simply is a way to augment a context window. So when you're dealing with, like, you go into ChatGPT, you say, who is Abraham Lincoln, right? Bang, bang, bang. But when you ask for like, what is the bank policy for turning off all the roles and access for an employee, right? Like you ask open any of those ones, it'll probably come back and say, well, I think and based on a bank, it should, but like it's not going to be your rules, right? And so, but you want that reasoning model power, right? That's the thing. These OpenAI and Anthropic and I'm a big fan of Google right now. So you want that reasoning power, but you want to put context sensitive. So what I'll do then is I'll put a lot of, in this case, maybe I'll put all my HR policies that I have, try to scrape them, try to clean it up, and put it in what they call a vector database. And so that vector database now is a mini, like people who are AI people will punch me in the face for saying, but it's a mini sort of LLM, and it's not an LLM, but it has the same structure. So now you can query against that. So now you can ask the question against what do I do when an employee gets terminated here at Bank XYZ? And now it'll come back, it'll look for paragraphs, they call them chunks, that are in all this data. Now, again, that can be wrong too, right? Some of it could be, depending on how the data got in there, it might be an FAQ, it might be actually an SLP. But anyway, and then what you get back is you tell, well, you know what, give me 10 paragraphs or 10 chunks based on this question. And then you can sort of you can use tools to check how accurate it was. And so maybe I take the first three, and it is all sorts of what they call, re-ranking. But anyway, I'm getting too deep. But then I take all that, and then I put that in the context window of the large language model and ask the same question. So now it's got all this context that's sort of the first area of data before it gets into the model and uses the power of that reasoning model. And then you can get highly effective answers, low hallucination rates, by using that combination. So again, when we talk about DevOps, so here's a good example. If I like sort of keep, there's some tools now out there that are doing this, but you can do this yourself. If I start keeping track, like what you're doing, like you're keeping track of what's going on, what the pipelines, what's failing, what's not failing, what's all these things, right? And now I can put that in this vector database. So now what I can do, so here's a great example. So now, once I've got the rag set up, I might use, I'm a big fan of Gemini 2.5 right now. So I might use but I could use any OpenAI. So now I can ask a question about, something, like tell me what is the most failed, sort of deployment, or explain to me why this one might have failed, or whatever, right? So what will happen now, it'll go to the rag first, it'll pull out the most relevant context from that vector. I'll throw that into the large language model, say, hey, can you give me a procedure to do this? Now it will look through the just thousands and millions. I mean, the large language models know a lot about DevOps. They know a lot about code. And then here's where your small language model comes in. So now I can get this sort of blueprint of like a little bit of knowledge or a fair amount of knowledge of what was going on prior in this environment from the RAG. Now I'm getting a sort of a less than generalized answer, but has a lot of DevOps and has the context of what I get. But now I can say, and this is what you would do is all through an agentic process like an MCP. Now go ahead and start hitting the large language, or maybe it was something in one of our SaaS providers. Maybe it was one of the things in a Jenkinsfile, whatever, right? Now I get these small language models that have very specific knowledge of what to do. So now you can start
So
seeing
now
it.
then now we can start thinking about predictive things, right? being able to look at what happened in the past to predict what could happen in the future. I
and
think about the data all the time. I think about the DevOps data and how
yeah.
underutilized the DevOps data
Oh,
is. I mean, if you think about a company like CloudBeast, they should be all over Deploy Hub and Ortelius because they execute, I don't know, literally to support the Jenkins community, I don't know, 50, 70 million workflows a month, right? And that is a massive amount
yeah.
of very specific DevOps data that could be potentially leveraged to improve the CI/CD pipelines overall. Where is the congestion? Where are the problems? How do we know something that we're about to deploy is going to fail? Because maybe we already know based on Terraform scripts that these parameters are going to break before you even send it out.
Yeah.
So I feel like in general, the industry's missing an opportunity and we really need
And
to shift.
yeah, and I think one of the things I think is going to be interesting, I said this to a friend of mine was at PagerDuty, and they were trying to get very early into incident management, and I said, that's like all the early examples to use Gen AI and incident, like, yeah, let me use my left hand and I'll code it while you're explaining it to me. It's that simple to do this stuff. But where I think the real power is for what y'all can do is be that resource. So you save me a step. Be the resource that allows me to aggregate all that information in an intelligent way. Now you become a provider to me in a agentic process. So instead of trying to go out and sort of boil the ocean of I'm going to be the new DevOps and all this, like you're spot on, right? We are. I mean, 2 years ago, IDC did a report and they said that 90% of the data, this is just general data, not just DevOps, but this would definitely apply to DevOps. 90% of the data in enterprise organizations is unstructured data, and often 50% is used only once. There's a gold mine. And what the beauty of Gen AI, and again, it's a predictive model. Yes, it can hallucinate. Yes, it can have wrong answers. But um, but the beauty of Gen AI is to go after that 90% and turn it from pure data into knowledge. I mean, that's the gap. Like that all of a sudden now I've taken a ton of, so if we think about the DevOps space, what are all the things we can take just pure data and move it in an evolutionary step to knowledge? And now I can work against that knowledge, like you just said. Hey, based on what we know about this type of deployment and under these conditions and all this, can you give me a prediction? One other thing I don't want to forget too is this will get very geeky, but it's I think it's important. I think not only are we going to have large language models, small language models, I think we really have to embrace something Google talked about 2 years ago, a year ago. It's this idea of the symbolic neural networks, I think that's called. And it's based on Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow and Thinking One, Thinking Two. So the idea is that you're going to basically not just exclusively use neural network or predictive or what we call transformer architectures. There are problems that are going to make sense to be sort of old school AI, what they call sort of symbolic reasoning, which is and then I want to mix the symbolic and neural net or sub-symbolic, which is neural network, as a combination because there'll be probably, especially in DevOps. In DevOps, there are things that we want to be reasonably deterministic, right? There are certain problems. This whole thing, if you Google it, it's called alpha geometry, I think it's called, right? And they realized to solve they were trying to go after like, what is the top geometry students? What's their rate of passing tests? And they found you couldn't use just a neural network to solve the problem, because you needed the symbols. You needed to combine the combination of sort of rule-based with probabilistic or neural networks, right? And I think as I was sort of doing a little research for this conversation, I thought, I think that is going to be an important thing because there are things I think we'll know. You asked some questions about like, do we do semantic analysis and things? There's going to be answers where yes. And I think and again, I have not done this, but I think that's going to be a fascinating area to explore.
So another area that I think that we're missing out on, and I don't know if AI could solve this, is software debloating. I mean,
Mm.
the amount of open source packages that are probably consumed and
Yeah.
not used is probably close to 50%. How is this is there some potential in being able to pull in dependencies and start debloating software?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think the important point is goes back to that LabCorp example. That's why I wanted to make it. The answer is yes. Will it be complete? In that answer, the executives are right. Like it may give an answer that will harm a human for the LabCorp example, but we were already 10% worse,
Right.
right?
Well,
So
we always said a software, if you can get 80%, you're doing really well,
yeah,
right?
and I think the benchmarks on a lot of this stuff is like hitting 70, 80% right now. Um, so I think the answer is AI and generative AI will literally make it will surpass human and rule-based technologies to do this, unquestionably. Will it 100% right? No. Um, but I do think that as we start thinking about like how do we start thinking about these tools? I mean, the beauty of these tools is they can understand at an incredibly efficient speed intent and execution logic, right? That no real human could figure that out. And I think that's the missing when you go back to all the sort of tools we've been using for dependency mapping, all that. They couldn't understand language, the combination of like understanding like the NLP, the language, the intent and the sort of execution flow as a combined. So it is better than humans right now. It will continue to be better than humans, but it will never be perfect. But I think like that's an area where that needs to be explored um, deeper
Well,
and
there's
deeper.
just some things that humans can't. The dependency graphs of the open source world is impossible. It's absolutely impossible for a human to do it. We have to create some automation. We
That's
have
right.
to create some intelligence around it in order to start reducing that dependency graph, so we can reduce the attack the attack surface. Right? We have a massive attack surface that we have to do something about, and I feel like if we can collect these dependencies, and this all comes from SBOM, so we have a good amount of that information.
That's right.
If we can start gathering this information and we can start applying it. And your topic on neural nets, that was one of the things that I thought about when I started learning about these APIs, these MCPs.
Uh-huh.
Because this now, we have an amazing opportunity to be able to go out and share data across these smaller language models and almost create a neural net, right? Isn't that what we're doing in essence?
Yeah. We're training, we can train models. Exactly.
We
In
can
fact,
train models and we can be more specific about training models if they're more domain specific and not foundational. I
that's
feel
right.
like having the foundational models actually downgrades the quality of the data.
Yeah, but again, go back to perspective. There's multiple ways to sort of solve this problem, right? One, sort of an agentic RAG is one, right? In other words,
Right,
I can use the power of that. So what I can do is sort of take a lot of the data, and then you've got graph RAG and all that stuff, right, too. So I can actually build these sort of RAG-like implementations to have more knowledge, so then I can let the foundation models do the deep reasoning, right? And that is, but I think the thing that you have to figure out is how far do you get on the sort of meter of what you want to accomplish. And if you find that like doing the RAG and there's things like re-ranking, and you can do a lot of cool stuff with RAG implementations, to get it pretty far without having to bring in somebody who knows how to sort of actually, run PyTorch or TensorFlow, right? But
right.
there's a point at which then, okay, the question then is, and this is for anything, not just sort of dependency understanding, is what is the consequence of a wrong answer? Is it good enough to be, ragged and agentic rag and all that stuff and re-ranked? Is the answers that you're going to get, and you can calibrate the answers to something called evaluations, um, and then or LLM as a judge is one technique. But then is that sort of range good enough? And it might be, yes, for this, it is good enough. If it is not, then the next step is you really do have to start training your own model. and that's a whole nother step of understanding, I would say a couple of years ago there were very few people. There's a lot of students coming out of university now that like
Well,
literally.
that's what I was going to say. In the Otelius community, we have made it a focus to say, let's do projects that allow people to educate themselves, get some experience on a real project that they can put on their resume. So that may be our next step because we want part of this process. We went through a whole phase of learning blockchain, right? And creating immutable records for blockchain, primarily for the purpose of education.
Right.
And if it builds something cool inside the product, great. If it doesn't, that's okay too. People have gotten a lot of background. So before we run out of time, I want to follow back up with my point in the beginning in terms of what the team is looking at doing. So tell us that we're on the right track, or if we're not, in terms of doing that auto remediation step in the process. So what we would do is if we would find, let's say, heaven forbid, we have another log4j issue and we have a new version of log4j, we need to add the new version into the POM files or the Docker files. What we want to be able to do is go through an organization's entire GitHub, all the repos that they're managing, find every single script that uses that and update it. Now, I know we can do that. I mean, I can think about ways to do it without AI,
Right.
but I think that there's a model to be pursued that doesn't just update that one pinning, but maybe corrects that it looks for problems and cleans up those Terraform scripts, those Docker files that have maybe some problems in them. Are we close in creating that autoimmune system?
Well, I don't know if you remember when we first met, and it was just sort of like bump into each other, and we didn't really have a great conversation. But it was one of the swamp ups. And I
Yes,
and I remember you seeing like, and I knew who you were, and then I said, "Oh boy, let me look at it," right? And I thought, okay, there's a lot of stuff going on here, and maybe nobody really understands what you're really trying to do. Like I
I
got
think
it
they.
pretty quick, but I was like, you had to have some deeper understanding to know what the value could be exposed here. I think the world has caught up to you. I think now, I think what I'm hearing and I'm seeing is all the things that you've been sort of doing for quite a few years. That knowledge, and this is the beauty of the sort of AI. What I get really excited about is like for me for research. If I know what to ask, I can do incredible research. I think for y'all, you're seeing that all this stuff that you've been, I wonder if I could do this. I'll say one, I know we're going to run out of time, but I go in these companies and do these hackathons. And I try to start not with a technical, let's write a bunch of stuff. I try to invite the business leaders to do like what we call a no code or concept hackathon. And then all of a sudden you see supply chain and forecasts and finance groups. You sort of give them the overview that like we're not creating any flying cars, when like it's not magic. There are some ground rules of what AI can and can't do. But you watch them think about the problems they've been trying to solve for years. And now for the first time, they see the capability of possibly solving those problems. And what I'm seeing, so the answer is yes, you're spot on. And it's going to be an evolution. It's going to be, it's not going to be easy. There's a lot of stuff going on here, but I think that like that goes back to the unstructured data thing. Just get the data into these
Get the
systems.
data. That's and the DevOps data is so left out in the cold.
It is.
It baffles me every day to think about all those workflows. We're executing millions of workflows a day and nobody's collecting or managing
But
that data. It's just
key point
completely
though is
unstructured.
if you don't know what, and this goes back to your expertise, I've gotten to know you through the Tech Gang exchange and your expertise and knowledge in this space, and it's very deep. And so the beauty is, you get the data and your sort of understanding of how these things work for working in years. That's where the magic starts happening. And I think this is, again, this is where it gets really exciting about like subject matter expertise, getting access. You've always had access to the data, but the way you had to get data was through scripts and sort of like
Most
just
people, we have the data, but it's checked into Git
right.
in an
And it's
individual script sitting there doing, that's like what's an SBOM. An SBOM's useless unless you
that's right.
consume the
That's right.
data and do
Exactly right.
something with
That's
it.
right. And actually, I have an article coming out this week about AI SBOM. So that's going to be a whole nother.
I just started learning about AIS bombs, and I
Yes.
was looking at what they create, and I'm wondering how useful it could be for what we're doing. But I think there is some interest in there, especially the version of the LLM.
The version of LLM,
Yeah.
the license, whether it's using an open weight model or. But here's another thing that, like, another area that I've been more focused on is what is the new pipeline? What is the software secure pipeline for creating these things? So as companies, this is, there's one thing for all the things we're doing to develop software. That's not going. In fact, it's gonna, like it's gonna get a lot more, right? Like more
Yeah.
codes being generated. But at the same token, as we're building these sort of systems, our own sort of either RAG based or our own models, I'm thinking a lot about what is the sort of pipeline going to look like. And that has to be secure. Because the question that, like the new sort of audit question, the internal audit mostly, but probably external audit, is, well, today, pre-AI, it's sort of give me the provenance of this change, right? And then you have to go back and sort of, well, we did this, here was the commit, all that stuff. You work, oh, did he do a SAS, DAST, all that stuff, right? The new internal audit question is, how did I get this answer? And that you're going to have, you can't just say, oh, well, Gen AI created it. No, sorry, I know enough about the tools to say that's not a correct answer. So you're going to have to keep your sort of egress, ingress, or ingress, egress to the LLMs. That's going to be mandatory. It's going to be a lot of data, but it's going to be mandatory. And you're going to have to show that. You're going to have to show that you have guardrails on the ingress and egress. Did you really try to protect somebody getting data that they shouldn't have got? Did you check the output answer? And then one of my main focus today is evaluations. These are tools that literally can create ground truth and test the accuracy of answers. Tons of work going on. It's been going on for years. It was part of the ML. Like now they call it observability for AI, right? And then going back to, like, if you built a RAG, what was the code that you created those paragraphs, those chunks? And then all the way back to the data. So two things are going to happen is you're going to need DevOps automated governance, the attestations to say, I did this, I did this, I did this. Same proof that you do for any classic software delivery. And then the S bombs are going to become incredibly important because not just the model, because I looked at some of the spec, the thing that's already missing is embeddings. A big
Yeah.
part of that chain is when you, especially in RAG, but anything, is using an embedding. And tampering with embedding can be one of the most vulnerable points in your pipeline in new AI stuff. So I want my embedding in Artifactory. I want an attestation that tells me that this answer came from that embedding, not just a model. And I want that in SBOM. So all the things, the data set, the license, if they were fiddling with the weights, I want the algorithm in some form. I don't know what it's going to look like. I want the model. I want the embedding. I want everything that I can create a bill of material for in an SBOM. So I think there's a tremendous opportunity in this AI SBOM.
And there's a big opportunity in gathering that data and making it actionable.
Oh, yeah, well, there you go.
Because that's
Yeah,
the last step, right? It's great
that's
to have
absolutely
it, but if you don't collect it and track it and make it actionable,
that's
then we
right.
wasted our time.
Right.
Well, this has not been a waste of time. Jon,
Hattie.
thank you so, so very much for taking the time to be our professor for
Yeah.
SecureChainCon
So,
2025.
and,
And welcome to being an alien. You know, we say aliens are
there
real,
you go.
and
Okay, good, good.
you will officially get a badge for doing
I'm a
this from the
frog and an
Alien
alien.
Committee.
So those are the two vendors that at least have annoyed me. And I will say, Tracy, it is always, honestly, a blast having conversations with you. And I mean that sincerely. Ever since we started on the TechStrong gang and, in these kind of conversations, because you're so knowledgeable and depth in an area that I'm more of a generalist on. And I just love having these conversations.
Well, thank you. Thank you for saying that. I so appreciate it. And we are have a full day ahead, or at least a half a day ahead. So stay tuned for the next person in the lineup for our Secure Chain Con 2025. Thank you, Jon.
You're welcome. Thank you.